From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador. This is From the South, and I'm Soini Gray. The Brazilian Workers' Party has declared former President Luiz Ignacio Lula de Silva will be its candidate for October's presidential election. This comes on the day after 3 judges upheld his conviction for corruption. The announcement was made in Sao Paulo during a meeting with the members of the party. Among them were former President Dilma Rousseff and the party leader Senator Jalisi Hoffman.
In my opinion, they haven't condemned me for a crime. I think they are trying to condemn a large part of the Brazilian people who recognize within the PT party, within Lula through the PT party and the social government, the possibility for this country to once again be respected, well-governed, and for the people to once again be happy.
I think we must understand this moment. I don't think we are at a stage in which we are breaking from democracy. I think that the democracy is radicalizing. It became clear yesterday during the ruling, a ruling which is a farce.
Nearly 50,000 people came to Republic Square in Sao Paulo, with thousands more protesting in at least 13 Brazilian cities.
Masses participated in demonstrations in Sao Paulo, rejecting what they call the lack of evidence in the case against the former president. His sentence was extended from 9 to 12 years, a decision that makes Lula the first former president to be convicted by a criminal court.
From now on, we have to be with people in the streets on a more frequent basis, explaining that the persecution of Comrade Lula without evidence constitutes a coup within the coup.
Social movements, unions, and leftist parties, even those opposed to the Workers' Party, said that the conviction of Lula is an attack on democracy. Many Petrobras workers came to see Lula, a key figure in the growth of Petrobras. Lula has been fighting the growing privatization of oil.
It's a political persecution of Lula. With Lula, Petrobras increased its investments. Without government investment, during the administration of Lula and Dilma, we hadn't, for example, discovered pre-salt, which is now being sold and delivered at extremely low prices.
Lula called on the people not to worry about him, but to mobilize themselves for national sovereignty. In addition, he said he would continue traversing in the streets with the people.
The court proceedings lasted over 10 consecutive hours. I don't know how many pages they read. Though there has not been a single crime, they are convicting people who have not committed any crimes. The judge simply is of a certain conviction or creates a narrative.
However, after listening to Lula, social movements feel encouraged to do more.
Lula continues to gather support throughout Brazil. João Pedro Stedele of the Landless Workers Movement promised that the fight for Lula will go on.
Lula will be a candidate despite the result in Porto Alegre. We need to mobilize, to campaign from August to October, and our campaign will be rooted in the politics and ideology of the working class. We can say certainly that we are going to make Lula a candidate and we are going to win the election. We are going to talk about a different future for Brazil. It will be a popular government. It will make structural changes as long as the masses participate in the electoral campaign and continue to mobilize.
The Venezuelan government says it is expelling the Spanish ambassador in Caracas. The foreign minister, Jorge Arreaza, posted the official announcement on his Twitter saying the Bolivarian government has decided to declare persona non grata the ambassador of the Spanish kingdom because of the repeated attacks and interference in our internal affairs by the Spanish government. And Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro, has confirmed he will stand again in the election to be held before the end of April. Maduro told a rally of transport workers that he would be a candidate for the poor, the working class, women, and youth. The Venezuelan government condemned a statement by the Lima Group of Latin American countries, which criticized the call for early elections. And President of the Dominican Republic, Danilo Medina, announced dialogue between the Venezuelan government and opposition will continue on January 28th and 29th. Talks broke down last week. He was speaking today before the World Economic Forum in Davos. He said it was important to reach a peaceful solution to the tensions that Venezuela is experiencing. And at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Argentina's President Marichuy said a possible trade deal between the South American bloc Mercosur is a natural one because South Americans are descendants of Europeans.
If you really believe that Mercosur is also a good opportunity for the European Union, especially after Brexit. And I think that it's a natural association because South America, we are all descendants from Europe. So it should be the first important agreement before others that we are negotiating. And we are close. We are very close. I'm visiting President Macron tomorrow, and I expect that he will give me good news.
Meanwhile, back in Argentina, protesters from the Barrios de Pie movement have marched in Buenos Aires against government plans to cut back on welfare. The social movement was protesting against the rising cost of basic items affecting thousands of families. They are calling on the Ministry of Social Development to approve an emergency food law as child malnutrition rates have risen in low-income neighborhoods.
Today, an ordinary family can't live on what they earn. The government keeps on putting off the cost of basic things. There are more and more cases of malnutrition. Why? Because a standard family doesn't get enough nutrients to get to the end of the month. So what do? They eat flour, noodles, but a child needs vegetables, a balanced diet.
A sunken submarine that once belonged to the notorious drug dealer Pablo Escobar has been found off the coast of Colombia. It is rumored that the submarine can contain the drug baron's $50 million fortune. Escobar, who died in 1993, was the head of the Medellin drugs cartel, and apparently he used submarines to ship cocaine from Colombia to the United States. At the height of his career, he supplied 80% of all the cocaine in the United States. We take a short break now. Join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting on. Welcome back. A petition spearheaded by the National Indigenous Congress in Mexico continues to collect signatures in order to formalize their participation in the July 1st elections. Its spokeswoman, Maria de Jesus Patricio Martinez, better known as Marichuy, visited Mexico City to gather support.
Playing protest music, social movements from Mexico City took part in a political and cultural event to support the tentative presidential run of the National Indigenous Congress.
This movement shares a belief that we are capable of governing ourselves, and above all, that we are capable of governing our land and our lives in general.
This is the second massive rally to collect signatures in support of the initiative launched by 400 indigenous groups, among them the Zapatista Army of National Liberation.
This is a legitimate proposal that comes from below, that doesn't make any promises. To the contrary, it's an invitation to organize and to defend our dignity in our lands.
Volunteers in support of the head of the Indigenous Council of Government, María de Jesús Patricia Martínez, says various political parties have failed them.
Things are only getting worse. The economy worsens. There's more violence, unemployment, there's famine and disinformation. So what good are political parties?
To take part in the elections, the Indigenous Congress and its subsidiaries must collect 860,000 signatures.
We call on you to rise up, to fight back. We must be autonomous in every way possible. We must rise up with whatever is at hand. We make this call because we can see that the war against the working class is going to be worse than ever. The war against the indigenous, against women, against children, against all of us.
Reaching their goal is a complex one. It's difficult and expensive to get the petitions to remote communities.
And our correspondent Pablo Perez has more on this story.
The independent presidential candidates for the July elections are still gathering signatures to get officialize their candidatures, particularly in the case of María de Jesús Patricio, the Indigenous National Committee candidate. She has only gathered 172,000 signatures, way below the about 800,000 needed for her to appear on the ballots. She has faced a lot of problems. A constant failure of the electronic signature register system that even led the Electoral Institute to move back the time margin up to the 19th of February. And also, she is doing it all thanks to citizen volunteering, which is very different from other independent candidates such as Jaime Rodríguez Calderón or Margarita Zavala. They say to be independent, but they are closely related to the most powerful party structures. So they got to the 800,000 signatures with ease, but they are contested because they are said to use replicate signatures or a copy of the voter ID in some states, and even having gathered all the signatures in one state when they need to be present on 17 of our 32 states. So the process continues, and the National Indigenous Committee says that the important thing of this is not to appear on the ballot, but to create a conscience in the people of Mexico that there are other ways to participate in politics and not only in the official parties.
We thank Pablo Perez for that report. Even after Pope Francis warned Peru about the urgent need to protect the Amazon and to stop deforestation, the Congress has approved a law that could affect the well-being of indigenous communities and the conservation of national parks.
The Congress led by Kiko Fujimori made a complete change from the Pope's wishes and supported Law 3723, which allows the construction of highways in the Ucayali Amazon. It directly affects 2 indigenous reserves and 3 national parks.
The Peruvian political class kills all calls of action, including the request to respect nature, which is a sign of a cynical and lying class.
For Rumril, this law was advocated as a national interest, one that would help drug traffickers who have taken Pucallpa, the capital of Ucayali, as the center of operations.
All of the high basins of the Ucayali River and its affluents are full of cocaine at this time. This means these roads that Fujimorismo is proposing are landing highways for drug trafficking. These criminals are saying, "Thank you, Congressman Yoshinawa. Thank you, Congressman Gallareta."
This project was rejected in 2017 by the Ministries of Culture and Environment, the United Nations, and the Amazonian communities. They called the law genocidal. Nevertheless, the Fujimori bloc used its majority in Congress to approve it.
We are outraged because just hours after Pope Francis gave his message to the Congress, they approved the law, which is an attack that will trigger protests by the indigenous Amazonian people of Peru.
The communities not only plan to protest, they will seek all legal options. They are also planning to write to the Pope, warning him about what they call immoral actions by the people who just days ago were asking for the Pope's blessings.
Chile's Congress has approved free higher education for the country. The Minister of Education, Paula Naves, says this is great news for thousands of young Chileans that want their right to education to be guaranteed and recognized. President Michelle Bachelet described the Congress's decision as historic. The bill passed with 102 votes in favor and 2 abstentions. In Guatemala, the Mayan Achi people are celebrating their patron saint, San Pablo Apostol, during a performance called Rabinal Achi. It is a theatrical play animated by masked characters and music with the aim of recalling the conflict between 2 Mayan states in the 15th century.
Historically called the Shayoctún, the Rabinal Achi dance is a pre-Columbian dynastic drama. It takes place in the town of Rabinal in northern Guatemala.
The Rabinal Achi dance tells the story of a conflict between 2 major political entities in the region, the Rabinal Achi and the Quiche.
In 2008, UNESCO officially included the dance in the Intangible Cultural Heritage of Humanity list.
This is our legacy, the one that our ancestors left us, which includes looking after the territory, our culture, and also our Mother Earth.
Our grandfathers and ancestors, they were the ones who made these big festivals.
The Shayoctún is not just a dance, it's a way for the living to get in contact with the dead, recall the ancestors, and perpetuate the heritage. Every year from January 16 to 27, Rabinal municipality becomes a fertile space for religious and cultural practices to blossom. As part of the festival, a representation of San Pablo Apostol is covered with elements Mayans consider representative of their origin, among them 365 feathers.
San Pablo representation also shows Achi people's typical elements, like the Glifio del Toj and the Nahual Toj. In one way or another, the Mayan culture is being preserved and has always been within us.
Participants say the festival is about sharing and living together, and that's why they also mark the day by cooking more than 20,000 tamales.
We are going to share it with the village and everyone else who comes to visit us.
With UNESCO's recognition of the Rabinal dance, the hope is that the ancient pre-Columbian tradition will not disappear.
Santiago Botón, Telesur, Baja Verapaz, Guatemala.
And news just coming in, a Brazilian judge has ordered the seizure of Lula's passport. De Silva was expected to travel to Ethiopia later this week for a meeting with African leaders. This call to seize his passport comes from a different case not related to yesterday's ruling. And we'll take a short break now. Join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. Two of the most pressing issues in the United States today are school shootings and sexual harassment. There have already been 11 school shootings across the United States in 2018. The most recent happened on January 24th at a Kentucky high school, killing 2 and injuring 18. Meanwhile, the Me Too campaign against sexual harassment has reached the World Economic Forum in Davos. Our correspondent in Washington, Jorge Gestoso, brings us the details of these stories.
Thank you. There's a lot of stress and insecurity among the students in the U.S. in this month of January 2018. So far, in 25 days, 11 shootings, almost one every 2 days. And in many cases, the one who shoot the students are other students. Lately, about 2 days ago in Kentucky, one student of 15 years of age killed 2 of his classmates and wounded about 19 others. And definitely one of the key issues that comes again to the surface is the gun control. On the other hand, one of the subjects that is already in the surface has to do with sexual harassment among women. The movement Me Too reached Davos, the annual economic forum that started precisely today, and Donald Trump has already arrived, and most of the women there start to bring in their different forums that issue of sexual harassment. In the US, a new poll of ABC News shows that about 60% are pretty much skeptical that progress is going to take place in the short term, but believe that at least creating awareness is a right move in the right direction. Therefore, students killing students at a pace that is absolutely worrisome, and women reacting to the sexual harassment that took place for many, many years, creating more and more awareness through the movement Me Too. We get back to you.
We thank Jorge Gestoso for that report. Former U.S. gymnastic doctor Larry Nassar has been sentenced to 173 years in prison for sexually abusing more than 160 women and girls. Many of the women who gave statements on the abuse they experienced as young athletes were children at the time. They were patients of Nassar, who served as a physician through 4 Olympic Games. Following this sentencing, the U.S. Olympic Committee called for the resignation of the entire USA Gymnastics Board, which is being widely accused of a years-long cover-up. The Winter Olympics are set to start in South Korea on February 9th. This year, the event is not just a celebration of sportsmanship, it is seen as a possible catalyst for peace on the Korean peninsula.
North Korea's women's hockey team is in South Korea. They will form a unified Olympic team with their peers from the South for the first time in almost 30 years.
We're in great joy about North Korea and South Korea being one team. If we compete well by uniting our strengths and hearts, I believe we will achieve good results.
For the opening ceremony, participants will march under the Korean unification flag, which will be carried by a representative from the North and the South. 22 athletes from North Korea will compete in ice skating, skiing, and ice hockey.
North Korea's participation in the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics will represent the most dramatic scene in the history of the Olympics. It can be a chance to show the value and power of sports when players from 2 Koreas march together and play games together as a unified team.
North Korea decided to send a delegation to the Winter Olympics after the 2 Koreas agreed to put aside differences over Kim Jong-un's nuclear missile program. The 2 sides also vowed to reduce military tension and to reopen a military hotline.
Today is a great moment for the Olympic movement because the Olympic spirit has brought us all together. The Olympic Winter Games Pyeongchang 2018 have opened the door for peaceful dialogue on the Korean peninsula. Our meeting today shows that Olympic sport always builds bridges. It never erects walls.
North and South Korea walked together at the 2000 Sydney Olympics for the first time after they held their first ever summit. For now, the united delegation is seen as a symbol of a possible reconciliation.
It's been 2 years since China abolished its family planning policy, better known as the one-child policy. During that time, birth rates have increased in a country with one of the oldest populations in the world.
It's still too early to fully appreciate the upward trend in birth rates. In 2016, 17.86 million babies were born in China, an increase of 1.3 million from 2015. This number represents the highest number of newborns since the year 2000.
As an 85-year-old, I have children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. I believe this two-child policy is very good for humanity and society. We need more people to build our world, but 2 children aren't enough. The government should encourage more births without fining anyone.
During the 70s, the Chinese government restricted childbirths to 1 per family, a restriction that relaxed in the following years until 2013, when the policy changed to allow families to have 2 children if one of the parents was an only child. Currently, families can have 2 children with no restrictions. But to have a third, they must pay a fine that in cities like Beijing can reach up to $47,000 depending on a family's income.
Chinese born in the 80s are mostly only children. I'm a Muslim from the Hui ethnicity. We can have 2 or 3 children, but the Han can only have 1. Regardless, in 2016, the Chinese government established a new policy to increase the number of Chinese youth. This law allows families to have 2 children, and I feel it's good for everyone.
Experts believe that China has 30 million more men than women because families prefer having boys over girls. Many couples would get illegal abortions. Other parties question this number, since many families simply decide not to register their girls, and therefore official documents don't recognize their existence.
We can now have a second child. This is a strategy by the administration that wants a balanced population. I have a boy and don't plan to have a second child because raising them is expensive, and I want to give better opportunities to my child.
Experts hope that this new strategy will lead to an increase of 30 million working-aged people by 2050, a radical change for one of the countries with the oldest populations in the world.
And the zoo in the central Mexican city of Tlaxcala is unveiling the arrival of its white lion cub. Children who visit the zoo are invited to name the cub. The name will be revealed in February. The cub was born at the Altiplano Zoo on October 28th and weighed 700 grams. As the cub was rejected by its mother at the time of its birth, the cub is being bred by zookeepers and veterinary personnel who ensure it's fed with a special formula until the little one can feed on its own. We've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, telesiotv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesio English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.
Telesur is branching out into new territories to democratize